All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Glad you're here. I'm Naomi, head of platform at Essence VC, where we back early stage technical founders. And today I get to play MC for the relaunch of Go-to-Market for Dev. So, a couple quick housekeeping items. I just launched a poll. You should see it on your screen. It should only take 5 seconds or less. And it's going to help shape today's conversation. So please take a moment to answer it, and then we can weave that in to our questions for our guest today. And then also, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen rather than the chat to submit any questions that you have. Tim and Apoorva will be pulling from Q&A submissions throughout the conversation. All right, and we already have some people saying getting first 10 paying customers is top of mind, multiple there. And then also on moving up market, landing bigger deals being a secondary focus. So that's two things that we can dig into a little bit more in the conversation. And speaking of my co-host, Tim and Apoorva. So Tim Chen is my colleague and the managing partner I'm lucky to work with at Essence VC. Before investing, Tim lived the technical founder journey himself. He co-founded Hyperpilot, which exited to Cloudera. He was early at Mesosphere and Cloud Foundry before serving as VP of engineering at Cosmos. And he's also a Apache member. All of which is to say, Tim has been in the room for a lot of the decisions we're talking about, both from the operator and investor side. And given our shared technical focus, we have the pleasure of often co-investing with Apoorva, who's the managing director at Zetta Venture Partners. Before Zetta, Apoorva invested at Lightspeed, Foundation Capital, also co-founded his own company in the NLP space, and was a go-to-market leader at Quit. So he has also seen every side of this early stage go-to-market journey. I don't think our guest today needs much introduction if you've been watching the AI developer tools space. Harjot Gill is the CEO of CodeRabbit, an AI code review platform that went from zero to very serious enterprise traction faster than anything I've seen in the category. So Harjot, welcome. I'll let you introduce yourself more and then start to kind of get into the early stage journey there and turn it to Apoorva and Tim for questions.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, folks. So I'm Harjot, co-founder CEO of CodeRabbit. And as you folks know, so CodeRabbit is the leading platform that provides AI-powered code review services for customers who are primarily on Git platforms like GitHub, GitLab. Essentially, like what we're doing is like as the volume of code increases with generative AI, it's becoming almost impossible for humans to keep up with the changes made. So that's where we have a product which is very clearly loved by hundreds of thousands of developers and tens of thousands of customers at this point. So we are a Series B company now, around like 150 people based in SF.
Awesome. Thanks, Harjot. Thanks for doing this and excited to dig in. Firstly, congrats on launching the new AI Planner tool. We just saw the news about it today, and we'll talk about that as well. But I think to kick it off, it'll be helpful for the audience to kind of hear a bit about CodeRabbit. What is CodeRabbit? And maybe walk us through the genesis of the company. When did it start? And like, how did you get the conviction that code review is an important area for you personally?
That's a great question. And we had a very, I would say, a different kind of a journey than most startups in the space. And very interestingly, both Zetta and Tim have been investors in CodeRabbit, but I mean, there's a very interesting story behind that. So this is my third startup. So I initially, 10 years back, I did a startup called NetSail, which was in observability space. It was like listen, spell backwards. And around that time, we saw like Kubernetes take off, and we knew that observability will become a bottleneck. And so we built a product in that space. Went from zero to more than $1 million in revenue within a quarter, B2B space, right? And then we got acquired by Nutanix right after that. Like that was a good exit. Then I was there like for a few years. Then I did another startup called Flux Ninja, which was in reliability management space, kind of continuing the NetSail's trajectory and going into more like control systems, controllability beyond observability. And that's where we first partnered with Zetta Ventures and Essence, Tim. So they were investors in Flux Ninja. Now, very interestingly, like back in 2021, when GitHub Copilot came out, and this was even before ChatGPT. I mean, that was like pretty much a mind-blowing thing. That was one of the first killer use cases of all these new generative AI systems. And even today, like coding remains as kind of the number one use case for generative AI. So when we saw that happen, it was like, okay, I mean, the world's going to change. I mean, it was very clear that a lot of the code will now be human written. No, I'm sorry, AI written, right? I mean, humans are going to be less and less involved in actually writing the code, right? And around that time, unfortunately for Flux Ninja, also the market shifted, like all the VC interest. Even this was during the time of COVID, like a lot of layoffs were still happening in the infrastructure space, DevOps space. The world was moving from to serverless computing more and more beyond like Kubernetes and service meshes. So all those like complexity was going away, and people were investing in like much more simpler architectures. In fact, away from microservices in many ways as well. So that's where we like CodeRabbit started internally as internal project within Flux Ninja. And that's kind of very interesting. So we built this tool because we had like a remote team of developers which were bottlenecked on code reviews at that time. Right. So this was like a very quick hackathon project, like looked nothing like what it is today. Right. So this was the very quick prototype, but the results were pretty interesting. Like with large language models, we were able to reason about the code changes, which like existing quality tools like linters and static analysis tools that we had were falling short of. So we initially, the CodeRabbit started as an open source project. So Flux Ninja, we open sourced the project. And very interestingly, that open source project started getting traction, right? And we had still no interest of commercializing it. So this was where my other co-founder comes in. He saw the opportunity there that, okay, this thing looks like could be a product. And he started CodeRabbit. And in like a few months, it just took off. I mean, the market timing and everything was just perfect for this kind of a product to exist. And Flux Ninja, in the meantime, we try to like make it work. We were also like putting our own money at some point, which I wouldn't advise a lot of other founders to do. It was pretty crazy for us. And in the end, it was very clear that the what we should be doing instead was this CodeRabbit project. And that's where we ended up acquiring Flux Ninja into CodeRabbit. I came on board. And ever since, this company has been a rocket ship, like growing at a clip of 15 to 20% revenue each month. Like almost like 500,000 developers are using the platform. Yeah, it's massive traction.
That's super interesting. And before we like talk a bit about that piece that you mentioned, right, that you leaned into that early product and your co-founder did that, maybe give a sense of like what the scale of the company is today in terms of like number of developers, whatever you can share, number of paying customers, growth, so that people have an idea of the magnitude of the company at this point.
Yeah, I mean the company, as you know, is like a very much a product-led growth business. So I would say majority of the revenue does come from pretty much the self-serve segment of the market. Over the last 12 months or so, we have been like also investing in our own sales team. So we could do like mixture of both commercial sales, which is like more inside sales, to more enterprise sales as well. So the biggest customer, for instance, we have is NVIDIA, which goes into the whole strategic account, 7-figure kind of deals. At the same time, we have very large number of customers who are like 5 seats, 10 seats, like 25 seats, like smaller accounts as well, but very large number of them. So it's a whole spectrum of the market across all verticals that need this kind of a tool. And almost every customer we have had, like I would say more than 95% customers have been coming pretty much word of mouth. So a lot of our growth has been just customers bringing in more customers, like flywheel effect, pretty much. And in terms of the revenue, right? I mean, one of the nice things about product like CodeRabbit, and which is kind of different than like code generation companies like Cursor and all, is the revenue quality is also very, very good. Like because of the central nature of the tool and center install, we sell to the teams versus individual developers. So there is like some upfront work in getting the teams to agree to buy it. So there has to be a consensus, like around in every trial and bake off we are in, like around 80 to 85% developers want this tool. So it's pretty easy to convince them, but it takes a few weeks though. And but once you are in, you are in. Like the churn is historically even less than most SaaS companies at this time.
Congrats on that growth and that momentum. A lot of people want to emulate that, but I think let's go back to the 0 to 1 journey where I think you mentioned that your co-founder leaned into the product and created a company around that. And you would have an appreciation for this, like compared to a lot of other people, just because you've founded 3 companies now. And I think that early phase of figuring out like what is a feature, like how does that early demo convert into an actual commercial product, and when should you lean into that? I think you did mention about like the early open source traction, and that open source traction was in the, correct me if I'm wrong, the GPT 3.5 days. And so curious, like what signals made you and your co-founder lean into it? Because there are a bunch of open source tools and not everyone takes off and not everyone is able to commercialize. So it'd be helpful to understand kind of the early like things that you did to get conviction around leaning in to the product.
Got it. I mean, it was like initially we didn't even like realize that this will become like a VC backed startup, right? My co-founders wanted to start a business for a while. I mean, he was like looking for an idea, something that he can also self-sustain pretty much, right? I mean, that was initial thinking, but very quickly that changed once we saw the traction this thing was getting. But initially we thought, okay, code reviews, maybe this is going to be a small segment of the market, not as big of a category that now we are realizing it is. And the initial traction initially started in Japan, very interestingly, independently, right? So this open source project got picked up somewhere. People started writing about it. There's this publication called Zen.dev, Zenn. And if you go there, you search CodeRabbit, you will see like around more than 50 blog posts written by end users. So the end user love was already there before it was even commercialized, right? Because the product was fun. I mean, first of all, and it did solve a big pain point. Because we built it for ourselves. And in fact, at Flux Ninja, we saw that pain point firsthand. And every company in the world has the same pain point. Like the code review is something that people hate doing. Like writing code, building features is more fun versus stopping and understanding the code changes. And even more so with AI now, right? I mean, it's always been historically even a pain point pre-Gen AI, but has been become much, much worse even post-Gen AI, and especially post-agents, I would say in the last 3 months. Alone, it has become so worse that our growth has been off the charts. Like every week, we are breaking new records of number of signups we are getting each day, or like we are talking about thousands of signups a day right now at this stage, right? And kind of becoming the fastest growing product. But to get to that, they were like, even we underappreciated the opportunity initially. Took us a few weeks to ourselves realize the pull in the market for this kind of a product. So yeah, so they were like, the biggest worry initially, like because we've done this a few times, was like who's going to pay for it, right? And the thing is that like coming from the engineering space, like me and my co-founder, like we have run teams for 15, 20 years, we understood that this is an enterprise pain point. It has to be sold to the team. So there were some decisions we were able to get right. Other thing we tried to get right was like emulate, like basically build the distribution into the product, right? So right from the day one. So one of the early bets we made was, because this was like around the time, like even GPT-4 was not there, like, or had just launched, right? So most people had not even tried these tools. This was kind of sometime for many people, like this was also the first time they were talking to an advanced AI system in many ways, right? So the biggest challenge for us was at that time, like getting people comfortable to use AI. Like everyone was trying to push AI into their products, and very few products were able to become a habit. The biggest friction was, will this become a habit? Will we be able to go into this core and a serious workflow? And developers are very opinionated. Like you're going into a workflow, which is a core workflow of SDLC, which is pull request reviews, right? And bringing an AI into that, which is not slop, it has to be super accurate, high signal to noise ratio, right? So there were like so many questions. Even we know that there were so many failure points that this could fail. But we kind of knew what those failure points would be, anticipated, build the whole go-to-market machinery around it, the product around it. And one of the cool things we did is like, just to get the habit going, we made the product free for open source, like which did 2 things for us. One was it acted as a flywheel to bring more customers in, because as you know, like most developers, they use libraries, which are like popular libraries, front-end libraries or whatever, like using, I don't know, TanStack or TRPC or something, right? And the second thing it did, I mean, first of all, these library maintainers already had this pain point, right? Even they're doing like a thankless job of reviewing the code being pushed to them by volunteers, right? And it's also become much worse in that segment. So they were like quickly able to adopt this tool and see value, right? And the second thing it did, it acted as a flywheel to improve the product, because the thing with the AI products is you need a lot of data to improve your harness. So we had this like little bit of a first mover advantage. We tried to make the product much more accessible to the masses. And then we were able to iterate very quickly to improve the signal to noise ratio, to figure out the actual workflows needed. And there are a lot of detail in the product. It tries to anticipate where the trajectory of the pull request is going and tries to make the suggestions based on that. A lot of sophistication behind that. And not to mention that when we started these agents, there was no such term as agents. Like this was even before the tool calling was there, right? So we were also one of the first products to actually build on sandboxes and using code generation to do code review. So we also innovated a lot on the memory layer and also like how to give these models access to CLI tools so that they can navigate the code and find issues. So those kind of things were a game changer for us.
Cool. So I think given that our audience is probably all going to be engineers or founders trying to figure out what to even build and how to grow like you did. And you talk about your story, it's almost like it can feel like an accident, right? You know, like I threw it out there, timing is right, the music is right, you know, things just blow up. But I think what you just mentioned, right? You know, if you ask anybody today about code review, everybody feel like it's probably the most competitive space you're ever going to see in your life, right? Everybody's jumping into it and it can feel like a commodity. That narrative is out there. Yet, I think you mentioned so much about decision making, making things, deciding where the product can actually get the product to be, anticipate failures, innovate in a different way. And so maybe for folks that are trying to start something and maybe also interested in jumping into like a developer related a tool space, can you maybe talk about some of the most important decisions and maybe some examples of that led you to not become commoditized when all the other players jumping in, right? And Cursor also added it, and I'm sure other people also added code reviews at its own. What are some specific things you did and some of the examples and effect of it let developers wanting to stick to you know, and not rather just go off and use just Claude and do code review for you only, right? Because I've seen a lot of people talk all kinds of variation of alternatives as if code review is just AI asking questions, just putting stuff up there. It can feel like that, right? So maybe talk a little bit more specific because for help people understand the sort of the quality and the depth of some of the decision, maybe the timing of the decisions when it's even not so clear, you need to make those. Can you talk some of that?
That's a great question. And these decisions have been evolving, right? So when we started, the battleground looked very different than what it is today, right? So when we started, the biggest worry, even the investors had the questions at that time was, are you guys just like a thin wrapper? Like, I mean, that was like the 2 years back. Like people had very little appreciation for the agent harnesses. Now, if you know, ask anyone today, like in fact, the models are now commoditized. Like you can swap, like at that time there was just GPT-4 and no one, Anthropic was not even on anyone's radar. Like, I mean, people thought this will be more like a Intel situation where your x86 architecture is going to run ahead of everyone else while everyone else lags behind each year, right? Because it's a whole industrial process behind building these models. But we were soon to realize that the models themselves became commoditized faster than we could anticipate, right? But right from the day one, like we were very clear that we will not be building our own models. And also this fine tuning would be a way, especially for the use cases which were coding space use cases, because coding data is something that's easily accessible even to the model labs. And it's going to be very important to them strategically because coding is kind of the gateway to do all kind of work. Everything is code end of the day. Like that's what we are realizing that if you can translate your problem to a coding problem, you can move 10x faster, right? So we saw this like 2 years back, this whole trajectory, right? So this was one of the bets we made was like, first of all, focus a lot more on the harness layer, right? Because one of the things that's going to be important in the AI space we knew was like, how do you make product which is going to be both good and cost effective at the same time? Which means that we had to like bring in all kind of models, like take the control away from the user to choose a model. Like on the other hand, companies like Cursor and all were going in the other direction with a model picker, and ChatGPT also has a model picker. Even in the past had a model picker. We were like completely against that paradigm. So some of those decisions were also right in hindsight. Also investing not too much in MCPs, but CLIs and sandboxes, those were the right decisions. So some of these things we were able to like foresee. And let's talk about the market overall, like how the market would have evolved. So we saw that like we also didn't want to go into code generation. We knew that that would be like very heavily contested and also not a great place to build an enterprise business, because even historically speaking, the whole code editor form factor, like if you look at Cursor, like it started as a fork of VS Code, and they were like other Copilot and all. They were basically based inside the code editors, and historically speaking, that market has been very hard to monetize, right? Or make sticky products. Like Sublime Editor, JetBrains, they all tried it, but it's not like been a slam dunk success when it comes to code editors. We knew that we had to build a product that will be more central, teams can buy and so on. Basically wanted to emulate Snake and companies which were earlier in the space, right? So that was another conscious choice, like not to fight in the battleground, which we knew we will lose. Instead, fight on the second order effect. If you look at all my startups, they were almost always a second order effect. Like my first startup was not to build a Kubernetes orchestrator. There were a bunch of companies doing it, like Rancher, and I know I stopped counting. There were so many of them. But the battleground over there we knew would be observability, because to be successful at the enterprise, you need visibility, right? That's where we have seen Datadog become successful. I mean, what Datadog did was also very interesting. Like you had Amazon growth trajectory go like that, and Datadog was right behind it. So code review is very similar. Like we kind of knew that code generation is going to be the main use case. It's going to take off. And this other product is going to be very important for enterprises, which we can like now push from behind and start making these enterprises more successful with the guardrails around agentic SDLC. And that has proved to be true. In fact, now more and more companies are realizing this code review or AI code reviews is going to be like a whole new category of product. In fact, I'll be not surprised if I would say a lot of the value is going to accrue actually in this bucket, because on the code generation, it's been commoditized to the point the switching costs are too low. It's a race to the bottom. We don't even know that open source models are going to end up capturing a lot of the value there, because you don't need like a lot of intelligence there. You need like lower latency, but even average intelligence does a decent job. And that's where we have been anticipating the future. Like we believe that the inner loop of coding, that's commoditized. Everyone knows that. You have option of like, I don't know, 20 CLIs to choose from. Different agents, open source agents like open code are also getting traction. The value we believe is going to accrue on the outer loops. Like review is one of the outer loop processes. The other one is planning, which is the product we just launched recently. And also our competitors also realizing the same thing. But the good news is that like we have had a 2-year head start in the market. Also a product that's been tuned. It's a specialized harness that's been tuned to be really good and cost effective at the same time. For instance, Cloud Code just launched a competing product because it saw the need for code reviews. But the product's like, I don't know, 100x expensive. Like you're talking about $15 to $25 a review versus in our case, you are paying like $30 per developer per month, but unlimited reviews. And the quality is just as good, right? So those kind of like engineering went into this kind of a product where we had start.
That's super interesting. I think you're right that like as the models are getting commoditized and as the coding agents are getting commoditized, the harness kind of becomes more important. And I think you historically, like you've done more review, and I think you're starting on the planning side now. And I think that kind of caters to two different kinds of audience and expands the audience. But let's like talk a bit about the review piece, because the review piece, like as more and more code is getting generated by individual developers, like unlike coding tools, right, that are adopted by individual developers, and sometimes they are the ones who swipe the card and pay for those coding tools as well. Review happens more in a centralized way. It more happens by senior developers. So they are the ones who are looking at the code, reviewing it, passing it through. But then the decision to adopt CodeRabbit and the product itself happens at a team level. So curious to hear a bit about kind of the way you got senior developers to kind of accept it, get excited about it, evangelize it. A lot of it is a community-led growth that you've kind of pioneered over here. And curious to hear more about that piece, because I think you mentioned initially that you saw early adoption in Japan. What are the different kind of like sources? Was it like Reddit, Hacker News, X? Like what did you see kind of work for you, and what did you lean into?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the audience, yes, it is the senior developers who pull in the product. And the reason they do it is like they want to like make everything go through a central quality gate. Right now, it's their headache that the quality bar is high in everything that gets shipped, right? And what we have seen is the market, like going back to the earlier point, it's commoditized and fragmented to a point that the developers are picking up the coding agents which they like, it's becoming increasingly very difficult for an enterprise to say that everyone will use Cursor. That doesn't work that way. It's like I like Vim or Emacs. I mean, it's a personal choice, like on what my kind of tooling that I like. And now we're seeing that with the harness and the models. Like some people are using Cursor, while we also see a lot of people now use Cloud Code, even I would say more than Cursor at this point. And we have seen like even people like certain models more than others. Like some people like Opus, other will like GPT-5.4, right? So with all that chaos and fragmentation, the senior developers, the reason they're like investing in CodeRabbit versus doing code reviews in those tools is because this is kind of the way where they can enforce the consistent guardrails. So these central guardrails are not going to go away, just like how Datadog remained. Like even though, yes, your Kubernetes makes sure your services don't crash, but doesn't mean you now switch off Datadog, right? So that is a layer they're investing in with CodeRabbit. Like everything has to go through that. And going back to your the other point around the marketing piece, right? I mean, that's where a couple of things was like for us, like the biggest source of customers happens to be still word of mouth and this whole open source. Like when we do a survey, when people sign up on where did they hear about us, majority are coming in through that whole open source funnel. So we are right now the top code review tool inside open source, even more than GitHub Copilot, right? And way more traction than any other tool, which also gives free code reviews in open source. And the second thing we did well was like this startup, to be honest, is unlike anything I've done in the past. Like my first two were very content heavy startups. Like we used to write really good blog posts, showed up on Hacker News a few times. That led to a lot of meetings and customers. I mean, that was like 7-8 years back. But the way you go to market today, and especially in the dev tooling space, it's very different. It's very consumer style, prosumer or consumer, right? So the way we went to market in this one was a lot more investment in platforms like X and Twitter, right? And working with a lot of influencers because these developers, they follow a lot of these like Primegan and Theo and all these like influencers they follow, right? So we had to collaborate and work with them. And by the way, it's not easy because they also have a very high bar, especially the tier one influencers on which products they want to talk about. They have to themselves love and use those products, right? So it took a while. It was like, I would say year and a half before even we got on the radar of these tier one influencers. We had started with more of up and coming influencers and betting on that. A lot of people also come from YouTube, like believe it or not, like YouTube has been like a very interesting acquisition channel for us. We have done like we have supported like creators who talk about CodeRabbit. We have also sponsored like ads in creators like Fireship, which millions of people watch. So yeah, so a lot of ads, a lot of influencer content. We have also started doing a lot of now out of home advertisement like billboards in SF, subway station takeovers in New York, in SF, even Bangalore. Like we've done a few cities already. So yeah, it's a very, very different style of go-to-market than we have done anything in the past. Still B2B, but still has a big consumer style flavor to it.
And how do you decide the sequencing, right? I think historically, before the AI era started, like open core companies used to be like, let's do open source, like let's build that community, let's get the evangelism going. And because that takes enough effort in itself. Get the contributors like in place and then start to think about commercialization. And that used to take like anywhere between a couple of months to even 1 to 2 to 3 years. And a lot of companies didn't even start monetizing till their Series A. How did you sequence the open source community growth and the commercialization piece? Was it in parallel? What did you sequence it out? What was the learning on that piece?
So that's interesting. So we did not invest at all in open source, us being open source. So we provide our tool free for open source. We had an open source project which we archived. So did Cursor, by the way. Very interestingly, Cursor also started in the same way. Their fork of VS Code initially used to be open source, which they killed. So did we. We archived it because there was no reason at this point in time in the industry to be open source. Usually what happens is like you have a company that goes and creates a category of some sort of a SaaS product. And 5 or 6 years down the line, you have an open source alternative. Like we have seen this like many times. We have seen Datadog, Grafana, Chronosphere or whatever, right? Bunch of those tools in Prometheus space now. We have seen that with Splunk and Elasticsearch. We have seen with GitHub and GitLab. right? So we didn't have to become GitLab while there's no GitHub, for instance, right? So we were in an era like, even if we were completely closed source, just figure out the distribution. Like open source was still important for distribution. Ourselves being an open core or open source would have made no difference. So we consciously made a choice to archive that open source project as soon as we saw that the only it was still necessary because it got us to a point where we could prove that the market needed something like that. But we treated it more of a throwaway kind of an experiment that there's a need for this product, archived it, rebuilt it completely as a service, which is closed source. And I'll not be surprised in a few years, someone does an open source version of CodeRabbit. It's inevitable, right? Which is as good. That's what happens in these spaces, right? There was no reason, but yeah. We never designed this as an open core model. We never built a community around it.
And so I think you already mentioned your pricing, right? Flat pricing, unlimited reviews. Obviously, to make that happen, you can't spend crazy amount per review, right? And so you've done a lot of work to make sure they can able to control your margins in some sense. But I guess really interested, like, how do you think about upselling? Because when you're selling to teams, you're not selling to individual developers alone. Yes, you talk about the product as so much of a prosumer play, that word of mouth billboards, right? You don't really billboards to teams usually. Like, it's for people to individually look at it when I think of a problem and become the awareness to try you and then fall in love with you, right? And so I guess maybe talk about a typical sales process. Is it typically like individuals try you out and then start to get other individuals in the team to use it because review bots, tend to help the team to look at stuff together? And do you have a follow-up process automatically to try to upsell anything at all? Just maybe talk through how you learned what the typical sales process, and have you defined that over time?
Now, that's a great question, right? So the reason we target a lot of individuals in some of the marketing as well, like our website targets teams, but some of this like messaging is around individuals as well, especially around our CLI plugin, VS Code that's targeted at individuals. It's kind of like what we call the breadcrumbs approach. Like if you're an individual, you are delighted by the experience we have to provide, then you are like going to bring us to your team, because all these developers, even if they're doing side projects or this open source contribution, they're almost always working in some company, right? And they have a day job, right? So that's how they, like in every like large enterprise that has come inbound, we have had like all kind of like companies showing up right now. In all those companies, like the individuals have already tried the product, whether in their own personal setting or in their open source projects, right, which that company has. For example, like we already like been installed in a lot of these Red Hat projects, right? I mean, then eventually they became a customer. But all that motion is because the individuals fall in love with the product and they bring us in. So that's what the motion has been designed for. But when they come inside, like we have so much volume which is inbound that we hardly even go outbound, by the way. So we're trying to build that machinery, but most of the volume is just inbound. And a lot of these deals were initially falling through the cracks. So as we were growing, we didn't have enough like people on our side to even answer like things around security questionnaires and so on. So a lot of it has been like a lot of order taking in the lower segments of the market where we do some basic enablement. So we have like segmented the customers based on the number of developers they have in the GitHub organization. So if they're below a certain threshold, we don't even talk to them. Then it's just marketing led nurtures to convert them. And over there, the success rate is also very, very high. Like from the number of signups to people who convert are more than 35% right now. It's crazy like how many even self-serve deals just convert on their own without us talking to them. Then we have, we call it sales assisted motion. Like beyond a certain size, we like, if there's someone like hand raisers, we call them, like if they want to talk to us, get some basic enablement and do some annual contracts because we love annual contracts. So we have like inside salespeople talk to them, and they are like all crushing their quotas at this time. Just the deal volume has been so crazy, and these deals usually move fast in 2 to 3 weeks, right? So we answer the basic security questions they have around SOC 2, GDPR, security posture, and so on. And then you have true enterprise where you're talking about, I don't know, talking to 5-6 stakeholders, navigating complex organizations, like really sales engineering involved, like multiple teams involved from our side, do a proper POV. See, they're still coming inbound, but it doesn't mean that they can just install the software. They have to work with our team, go through all the security checks, plan a proper POV where we have the success criteria figured out on what that should look like, given that we've already sold to like multiple companies. We know what the right POV looks like, how many developers they should be trying it on, just to understand the value. And even that POV we try to like contain within like 6 to 8 weeks maximum, right? And as soon as the POV is done, it's very clear we have the metrics around the ROI for this tool, which is actually really amazing. It's like a step function improvement. So they do a developer survey. There's a vibe check part of it in the POV that, hey, do you guys really want it? And developers usually vote yes. But then there's the whole science part of it, like more like, can we quantify how many security issues we found? What was acceptance rates of these comments? Like, did we even see the velocity change on merging these pull requests? So there's some KPIs we try to measure, right? And once you like present a business case, then it's just like navigating to the right decision maker or the economic buyer and getting the deal done. And of course, then that's the process. Like, I mean, you have to go through the security again and procurement and whatnot. But we are like kind of attacking all segments of the market. Like there is no like, if I go and look back, like sometimes you have same product going to different markets like New Relic and App Dynamics, opposite ends of the market. At CodeRabbit, we are seeing entire spectrum. So we have to run a GTM machinery in a very different way. It's very hybrid. So it's like running multiple companies in one. So the needs of companies which are in that commercial segment when it comes to solutions, help from our side, customer success managers, everything is account managers that look very different on the velocity side versus on the enterprise side. The quotas look different. I mean, it's a completely different setup. And we had to consciously build that machinery.
That's really interesting, and thank you for digging so deep into this process. I think worth also talking about like how this evolved as well. This right now you're selling to enterprises and mid market, which is high velocity and kind of the long enterprise sales. And hopefully in today's market, the long enterprise sales is still like a couple of weeks to a couple of months, given that they're buying this tool very quickly. So initially as a founder-led sales motion, right? When did you tap into like these high velocity accounts first? Did you go to enterprises as well yourself? And at what point did you bring in the first sales hire? And who was the first sales hire?
That's a great point. Like we didn't get any sales hire until we had hit $1 million ARR. So 0 to 1 was entirely founder led. People like scheduling demos, because a lot of the times people will try and buy, but still like some people want to see a demo. So we were taking calls, even like early mornings calls in Singapore, all over the world. People were trying, and they were a lot of them also curious about AI. This was back in 2023. Like a lot of these systems have still not like become common. Like even ChatGPT was not that common back then, right? So yeah, so a lot of that 0 to 1 was completely founder led. We didn't do any outbound. Even right now, we are still like very early in the outbound machinery. It's all been inbound for us from the day one. But still like pained a lot when we were losing deals because we couldn't answer to them. So we have also had like several months where people were upset about the support they were getting or the attention from our team, because most of the machinery was designed to be just self-serve and put a credit card in. Anytime we wanted to do a demo, like there were not enough people. So once we did the Series A funding back in 2024, that's the point we brought in the first sales hire, VP of sales, who I knew from my previous startups. Mike Fox is based out in Boston. I mean, he did great. Like he took the company from 1 to wherever it is today now, right? Tens of millions of dollars of revenue now, right? And even then, like when he came in, like, even he had to recalibrate because the previous generation of startups he had worked in, usually his style of working was like, I want to sell a few deals on my own, like learn what the process looks like before I hire other set of salespeople, right? That's where we kind of lost a little bit of time. Like he also didn't realize that how quickly we had to build the sales team in this company. So initial 1 or 2 months, he was like selling on his own, understanding the process, getting really good with the demos and the concerns and the pushbacks. And the thing is that we were still overwhelmed. And then he started hiring like a couple of salespeople, and then it grew from where it is to like 50 or 60 GTM people now on the team.
Very interesting. How did you decide like who to hire initially on the sales side? Because a lot of questions come up, right? That as after you transition from founder-led sales to kind of expanding your GTM team, maybe hire a rep first or hire an SDR first who can bring you more leads. A rep kind of helps you kind of run the process. An SDR kind of gets you more leads. A sales leader is always a question whether you should get them early on or like little later once you've had a couple of reps selling. for you as a founder, because a sales leader, they haven't been an IC for a while, and for them to kind of run deals themselves, I think takes time, and it takes an onboarding time for them to at an early stage company. So I'm curious, like, how did you evaluate that, and how did you bring him? I know that he has a background from Styra and also I think Mabel. So developer focused companies, but
Yeah.
just like what was your thinking around that?
Yeah, I mean, even we had started with like a few helping hands, I would say, part-time sales rep that I also knew from my previous startups. We didn't like get them full-time eventually, but they were like some helping hands we got just to do the demo calls, right? Because with the founder like taking us from 0 to 1 million, like we learned a lot as part of this process. Yes, I mean, it's really critical that founders first learn how to sell the product, learn the end-to-end process of how do you first of all acquire these customers. In CodeRabbit, we're getting inbound. In my first two startups, we were still outbound. Like we had to figure out the right email message, the right segmentation. So you have to build the whole SDR machinery. So this answer is going to be like really dependent on the situation you are in. If you're going to rely on knocking on someone's door, then you really have to set up a motion on how to acquire, even get to the meetings in the first place in a repeatable manner, right? So that takes a very different kind of an effort. And then after that is like, how do you like each step you have to like figure out, right? I mean, the POV process, the decision making process, and everything. So in our case, like at least the acquisition of customers, at least people showing up on the doorstep was solved for as part of our distribution and the PLG motion we had set up through open source, right? Then it was just a matter of like getting the right people who could do the technical demo and answer the questions, right? And in case of Mike Fox is also great. Like, I mean, he's also like almost extension of founders. Like it also depends on the personality. So I would say most of the time the sales leader hires, they go bad. Like, I mean, you get someone who's been too high level. They've not been in the trenches, never sold anything for many, many years. They're like 2 or 3 levels removed from a customer. If you ask them like, when did you last time take a customer meeting? I mean, they wouldn't know answer to that because they're not really talking to the customers in many places, right? So this is where like Mike Fox was special. Like even at Styre and other places, he was on the ground actually doing demo. Like I mean, my theory was like if someone could sell Open Policy Agent, I don't know how many of you know remember that product. Like it's its own programming language, it's very declarative. My theory was if someone could sell that, this should be a piece of cake. That's what we gravitated towards that person, because on the sales you want to see like has they seen success because the product was just so good, or had they seen success because they were a great salesperson? You want to go more towards the latter, right? You want to see that has someone sold an average product and still made it successful or hard to sell product. So this was what we liked about in our first sales leader. So, right, even though Styra, we know that wasn't a great success. It got acquired and all by Apple or something, but the product itself was very hard to sell. Like given that it was very powerful, but it was a whole new programming language. You had to like really educate the user, do sessions and all like as onboarding, and he did all that, right? Very hands on. I hope that answers the question. Like, so there's no right or wrong answer in building these businesses. Like all the startups I have done, they have looked very, very different from each other, right? And half the time you're debugging when you're in the early days, whether it's a product problem or sales problem, that makes it even harder. And Tim and all, you guys will remember from Flux Ninja days, we were still debugging that problem. That is it a product problem or are we not able to sell? Is it COVID? Because there's so many like variables, right? So when it works, it works. Everything looks good. But when it's not working, then debugging takes a lot of time. Is it an SDR problem? Is the problem somewhere else? And that's where you have to like really have hypotheses. And the faster you test those hypotheses, and the faster you can pivot. So pivoting in the early days is also like really important. Most of the time, to be honest, it's product issues if you're not seeing traction.
Which is never obvious, right? Because
Yep.
I still remember we're working together on the Flux Ninja days,
Yep.
and debugging that wasn't easy, right? Because it can feel like any particular issue wasn't like there's no momentum at all, right?
Right. And
But yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's an insertion point issue a lot of times as well. Like you might have a great backend technology, but just because you're inserting it in the wrong place, it's going to be an uphill battle, right?
and I think it's so fascinating to think of how your company came about. I know we just kind of talked about it, but going back into it, it just feels like, if you're so knee deep into your existing problem set and it wasn't so obviously flywheel flying, oftentimes it's not that easy to pull out and just completely pivot into in my opinion, with Flex Ninja and CodeRabbit, even though it's like developers, it wasn't really anywhere close, right? Of a direction you would take at all. And so I'm very curious because I feel like we've all lived through the infra world, you know, when you're selling OPA, you're selling Kubernetes, you're selling observability, and obviously we're selling code review now. It can spiritually feel like the same thing, but we've never seen the AI era in our lives, right? I think Kubernetes has nothing to in comparison with what AI craze is. So what are some of the unique challenges trying to like stay ahead in terms of both your sales, your traction, and your products when I think the whole world is debating every single second what to buy versus build versus do what, right? It's a pretty crazy world where I just wondering from your point of view, being a CEO of CodeRabbit, what are probably the most unique challenges you face that you think is probably unique about this time? You know, not just about the product, but like this time and how you sort of like have to play ball a little differently, given there's such a huge amount of hype going on and stuff.
No, definitely the time frame is where we are moving is very compressed. In like 10 years back, like Kubernetes was like one of the inflection points taking off, but it was nothing like what we are seeing right now. This is like way bigger than I'm assuming like even internet in many ways, right? And the biggest challenge here is like, where is the stable ground for you to make a bet on, right? Because you have model labs also coming and competing with the same kind of products. You have other startups, right? I mean, it's chaos, right? I mean, coding, especially in the coding space where, um, given that how strategically important coding is, like even both OpenAI, Anthropic investing heavily in Cloud Code, Codex, desktop experience, CLI experience, competing with startups in the same space and so on. I would say code generation is much more contested than code reviews. Like, I mean, so that at least that part of the bet was right, that we don't want to go and fight on a battleground where you need billions of dollars of capital to win, right? And focus on second order effects. So that the key point here is like, now we are at a stage where on the code reviews, we have a decent moat on the tech and the price to performance of the product and the quality, right? I mean, it's not easy to catch up. For us now, the biggest worry is like, if we stand still here as well, we still get crushed. I mean, it's a wave we have to keep riding. So what's the next battleground going to be? Like, where do we fight next? Like, the behaviors are changing. I would say in the last 3 months alone, there's been another inflection point. I don't know how many of you are paying attention with Opus 4.5 and GPT 5.3 Codex after that. The agents have also become really, really good, right? So like, I've not seen like so much change in the last 10 years of software development that just changed in the last 3 months alone. There was another mini inflection point that just happened. And the behaviors have changed. So I code a lot. I don't know how many of you have seen my GitHub activity. I mean, it's all a green carpet. So one of the things I'm doing now is like not even going to the code editors, right? The whole agent development environments they have taken off. I love the Codex desktop app, right? So you're not even now at a stage looking at the code that is getting generated, right? So you're trusting on another AI to review your code, which is CodeRabbit, right? So in this whole agentic world, like CodeRabbit is like watching your back, you still need that, but you're not as a human looking at line by line code. So where does the review happen, right? I mean, the world has changed. Now you're not reviewing the code anymore. What you're doing is reviewing the intent. So the reviews are moving upstream, right? So that's where the thing with the agents now is like, they can get you from point A to B as long as you can describe what B should look like. So you have to like really provide a nice specification, provide your intent over there. So the battlegrounds are very shifting away from the middle piece of code, software engineering, which has disappeared pretty much overnight, to reviews. Reviews still matter, but I think with AI, that's also solvable. Like you don't have to do code reviews anymore as a human. Like you don't even care about the code going in anymore. Like, I mean, line by line, no one even cares. Where the manual effort is going to be is upstream. That's what we have been anticipating in the last 3-4 months. We had been seeing this future appear, materialize in front of us. And that's where we had started investing in like planning now. Like that's another centralized use case. And that's something that shouldn't happen inside Cloud Code or Cursor locally. It's a collaborative activity. It has to be decoupled, right? So those are the kind of challenges we are going through. Like, I mean, we may be wrong in this bet, but the main thing I see is that you have to make bets. Like I give the analogy that it's like producing 10 Hollywood movies, right? Some of them are going to be like flop, some kind of barely make money, and then some of them are going to be blockbuster ideas. So at CodeRabbit, that's what we're trying to do. Yes, we have a blockbuster idea, which was code reviews. That business is humming along well, bringing in more and more customers every day. And directionally, it's in the right spot, right? I mean, its traction is not just because of us, because also the growth and the market just hit us at the right time, right? Now the question is like, can we go and reinvent ourselves to where the world is heading, right? Have another blockbuster idea. That's where we are as a company.
Yeah. I mean, just two comments just listening to this, you talk about it, which is kind of funny is, we as founders, I've been a founder before, we operate actually the same time when Netza was going on, right? We as founders, what we think is the best idea, best problem to solve ourselves, often is not really the best thing to work on. And whatever you throw out there as a sort of like, I don't know, it just solves my problem. I don't think anybody will use this or is a big problem. Turns out to be the biggest thing, right? But also, I think what I hear from what you're saying is it's so important for you to still be involved, to use the product, to be closer to be still writing code. Because typically a Series B company, at your valuation, the CEO is no longer doing this stuff anymore, right? It's really just hands-off delegation, making sure the sales playbooks and all that kind of continuation. But the space we're in, we're no longer just like sit there and figure out how to like, make sure we have the best VP of sales alone. Is you still need to be involved in the activities to make sure when inflection points are happening every quarter, right? You can't just rely on somebody down in your org chart to kind of tell you alone. Obviously, it's a collaborative process, but you have to be involved, which I found to be pretty fascinating. When it comes to how AI companies grow, is no longer go find a professional CEO and let it ride, right? Because this is what most VC think of. In this era, I don't know how that happens at all.
It's hard. Like the space is evolving faster than we haven't seen anything in this space. Like, I mean, even in internet, we had like Yahoo and Googles of that era. But in this space, it's happening in a matter of months. Like, even if you look at code generation, we moved from tab completion. By the way, it all started with simple tab completion suggestions, right? To now fully agentic systems, right? And that has been mind-boggling, like how much changed in 9 months. I would say even last 3 months have been like another inflection point. So it completely changes your thesis on like a lot of the companies that you will talk to in this space. They're like going and rebuilding their products. They have to constantly keep finding PMF, right? Then that's been one of the unique challenges of being in the AI space right now. With the models improving, agents improving, techniques improving, because we are still like even the model labs, they are themselves trying to struggle with the right way of using these models. If you remember, like 12 months back, everyone was jumping onto this MCP bandwagon, right? Now they're saying, okay, MCP is shit, use CLIs, right? And I mean, even the way you use the model, like the infrastructure needed to run these systems, that the mindset behind that keeps evolving every few months. So that's why, like, as a CEO and the founders in this company, like, we are very much hands-on involved. Like, we are closely tracking what these systems are good at right now, where they're heading, so we can make the next set of bets, right? And that's a unique challenge. Like the pace is like crazy every day. In every day we like closely track the Twitter streams. So much happens in like period of 12 hours, 24 hours. There's almost always a new model we are testing from Anthropic, OpenAI. Yeah, I mean, even like there's so many new models coming out. In fact, the testing the models has become a bottleneck. Like we have an evals team, but we also cannot use too many models because these models are now completely being tuned to the harness we have. You can't just swap them in and out. So there's a lot of like the infrastructure looks very different than what we have seen in the past. This whole agentic economy is built on like this new kind of ideas around workflows, sandboxes. How do you secure credentials from these models because they are supposed to talk to the outside world? So there's a lot of innovation happening in the space right now that we're doing.
And
at the same time, yeah, there's innovation on go-to-market as well. Like the behaviors are changing, right? The habits are changing very, very rapidly, very rapidly.
I know we have 5 minutes left, so just wanted to see if audience has any questions for Harjot. Otherwise, I have tons of questions, but I'll try and squeeze in one more in the end. I guess I'll go ahead with my question. so far, I think the focus has been on like senior developers, the people who are reviewing things. And I think you spoke about the harness, you spoke about kind of the extension to other parts of the harness. The planning piece is kind of a pointing in that direction, and I'm sure there are bigger plans around that. Do you expect that to kind of extend the audience beyond developers to PMs from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, what we have seen is that this coding is just a starting point to do all kind of knowledge work. Like as I said, like everything is code. Company has code, right? So
Mhm.
if you can translate your problem to a coding problem, like whether it's sales problem, marketing, product problem, PRDs, like it, you will move much faster with these models because that's what they're really good at,
Mhm.
right? So one of the unique innovation of CodeRabbit was we were using code generation to do code reviews, right? So if you look at underlying architecture was we were generating a lot of Python scripts, CLI commands to test the hypothesis whether this code that you're changing is going to work or not in a
Right.
sandbox environment, right? And there was this global memory layer that we invested in. Now the question is like, can we now bring those ideas to other forms of activities? So upstream of us, very clearly, the product, as I said, is now becoming a bottleneck. Now it's a taste problem. Now getting something to build even complex software, complex state machines, UI, all that is easy, right? Language doesn't matter. You can build everything in Rust if you want, even if you don't know it. So the bigger bottleneck now is the intent, knowing what to build, knowing what your destination should look like. And if you could articulate that, you'll be very successful with these agents, right? Even validation is easy. Like, I mean, you have a very clear eval, I mean, how the software should work and agent can iterate and get it to work, right? But the upstream problem is still manual, right? So that's the next bottleneck, the product piece, like, and that's where what we call planning, like how do you bridge a gap between what to build and the coding plans, and that has to be in a collaborative setting. And that's another place where the senior developers are now bottlenecked. So they have a user story, but what's the right way of building it? Like in the past you were like aligning your junior developers, showing them the code on how to make a change. Now you have to create a prompt. Basically prompt creation is a bottleneck. I mean, if you look at every company around, out of 10 developers, 2 or 3 are crushing it with AI. They are getting high accuracy. They're using the plan mode locally. They're doing all the right things. The rest are still opening a lot of slop PRs which end up getting closed because they are like completely off track. And especially in the sessions where you have agents run for like long periods, they almost always go off track unless your intent was very clear. So that's, I guess, the next battleground in this space. And that's where we're trying to make a bet. So we don't know what the right form factor is going to be, right experience is going to be, but we are iterating on that very quickly. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you, Harjot. This is unfortunately the time where we need to wrap, but Harjot, thank you so much for showing up and sharing the nitty-gritty of CodeRabbit's go-to-market journey. For our audience, if you haven't tried CodeRabbit yet, I highly recommend going to CodeRabbit.ai and taking advantage of their free trial. Also, thank you to Apoorva and Tim for making this such a great first episode back. The recording will be available at go-to-market.for.dev. That's GTMfor.dev later today. So feel free to share it with builders in your network who couldn't make it live. We'll also make it available where you listen to podcasts. This is a monthly series. So if today was useful and interesting, we'll be back next month with another guest going deep on a different part of the go-to-market puzzle. But thank you for joining, and we'll see everyone next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.